Om Sato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya Abira Abira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam Tinamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. We open this morning with 1 hour of meditation, which the live streaming audience wasn't present for, unless you were joining us at home. And then we continue on for another hour this morning, Sunday morning here in Hawaii, into a kind of early satsang, where you may also join in with those of us here at the SRV Associations at the Hawaii Ashram. And we'll be answering the questions that you've sent in about spiritual life and looking into answers that can shore us up against the vagaries and vicissitudes of Maya. Maya, that four-letter word that is perplexing and inscrutable. Those things that are accosting us and afflicting us on all levels of our existence. That is, in spiritual life we account for many different levels of existence. There's the physical, which most people are aware of, and then there is the level of mind, thought, and it's the energy that supports it. We call it prana. And then there's the intellect, which hopefully has its open and free play amongst the mind and its thoughts. That is our higher intelligence. And then there's the purely spiritual. So you might also say there's the philosophical and the psychological. So there's so many different levels you can list and hopefully account for in your daily process. Sit like this and face them off every day before you go to work, before you enter into relations with all the bodies out there, whether they be physical bodies, celestial bodies, your causal body in deep sleep, the body of meditation, and the body of knowledge you encounter. It's not just the physical body that is the concern with us here in spiritual life, in dharmic life, but all bodies, all levels of existence. And you should be able to take them at the level in which they operate and deal with them. Better than deal with them would be to celebrate them once you get the problems answered. So, or the questions answered, the problem solved. So, in that regard, we try and come together in satsang as often as possible in our sanghas with our spiritual leaders of different religious traditions of the world and the communities we're in. Whatever access we can have to them, we should take that wholeheartedly and then find solutions for these problems that come up in everyone's life, even those people who are affluent and don't have to deal with the suffering and poverty of cross-section of humanity that we're also concerned with, bringing solutions to all levels of existence. As I was saying, particularly the mind, because if we can bring them to the mind, then since everything has come out of the mind in these mind-only philosophies of India that we study, Vedanta, Yoga, Buddhism, Samkhya, and then if we solve problems at the level of the mind, then we will find that everything else evens out. And that's the nature of some of these questions, is why I'm sort of talking from that perspective right at the beginning here. So there, I see here that about 5 or 6 questions have come through. Let's take them one at a time. First, this student says, is it necessary to be enlightened to break the bonds of birth and death? Or she poses it in another way. Is there any way off the wheel of birth and death without becoming enlightened first? Well, first you have to define terms, of course. The wheel of birth and death, if you define it as samsara, as Lord Buddha did, then you're talking about something that needs to be transcended, something that you become aware of in relation to repetitive cycles. Repetitive cycles of goodness, repetitive cycles of dharma, dharmic actions, righteousness, repetitive cycles of study and recitation of the Lord's name called japa, repetitive cycles of meditation. Those, of course, are not something we need to get off of. Those are something most people need to get onto. We need to have those kinds of cycles operating in our life. Dharmic cycles, we could call them. So let's make that division first. That's, of course, the division Vedantists would make between the real and the unreal I just chanted, or between the lower knowledge and higher knowledge. Definitely between ignorance and knowledge, and also higher wisdom and secular knowledge or intellectual knowledge. All of these are very beneficial and healthy divisions to make in your mind. And that's practicing the art of viveka, or discrimination. Our main Swami Vivekananda, who is a part of our SRV association and the founder of the great Ramakrishna order that we belong to, that we were taught by in SRV. He took that word viveka as his name for very good reason, because that practice of discrimination between the real and the unreal is at the heart of a dharmic life and a peaceful mind. So, yes, to get off the wheel of birth and death, as far as snapping the chains of bondage, yes, you need to do that. And the question then, it becomes, can you do that without becoming enlightened first? Well, I've always said that if we want to define the terms of enlightenment, that it would be first the destruction of ignorance. There are many, many levels of samadhi, for instance, in yoga, that Lord Patanjali talks about. There's the samadhi of thought, basic knowledge, and there's the on the outer spectrum of the mind, and then there's the inner thought samadhi, and then there's the samadhi of bliss that comes when peace of mind comes, and then there's the samadhi of cosmic I, or the I amness samadhi, they sometimes call it. So if we look at this as different levels of our consciousness, then we must also make the conclusion that there are different levels of enlightenment. So if you're talking about full enlightenment, then it would probably not be such a matter of having to get off the wheel of birth and death. It would be more of a matter of birth and death do not occur to you. You would be living in what's called eternal life, what Jesus called eternal life. So consciousness is a very special facet of our awareness then. That it can be sublated, it can be superimposed over, and therefore fall back hidden behind the everyday thoughts and actions of life, or you can bring it forward. And when you bring it forward, then these things called the 6 passions, the 8 fetters, the 5 impediments to yoga, and the 4 deadly traps, and all of these vagaries and vicissitudes of Maya I was just talking about begin to dissolve. And that is a part of the dissolving the mind stream meditation you do every day, of course, before you get to the real dissolution process of dissolving the ego, or dissolving the small ego into the larger ego, into the cosmic mind. And then you're going to have to dissolve these impediments that come up. There's questions here about that too, which I'll get to, using the prana, that is your life force, your energy, your willpower, to do that in the mind so that they don't impede you in the outer life anymore. To take the inner life and the outer life and render them into one level of consciousness, is how Shankara puts it in his Viveka Chudamani scripture. So, enlightenment, to become enlightened first, you could put it that you need to get off of one wheel and get onto another. So the wheel you want off of is this rounds of birth and death, you're saying. Rounds of birth and death and ignorance is what you're talking about. So the ignorance has to die first. And then you're in some sort of state of samadhi when that happens. It's called a wisdom samadhi. And you can live in that wisdom. It's a mental samadhi. It's a mind-intellect samadhi. And it accompanies you everywhere, and it colors your perceptions. Just like your perceptions were colored earlier by fear of birth and death, or confusions of life. So that's life, birth, and death. That's that problematic, conventional life, or life that's impeded by suffering. So you want off that wheel. And there's another wheel that is running adjacent to it, but in the opposite direction, called morality. So most people are born with that, I would say. A natural disposition towards goodness, and away from a natural disposition away from violence, and away from evil doing, away from jealousy and anger and the unwholesome roots that Vedanta and Buddhism talk about. So off of the wheel of birth and death and onto the wheel of morality. But morality hasn't shown itself up to be able to enlighten us fully. It's still concerned with virtue and vice, and therefore the duality is still present in the mind, and people are beginning to brood. Instead of their brooding on their suffering and their pleasures, which happens in that first wheel of birth and death, then they begin to brood upon virtue and vice, whether they're good or whether they're bad. And so that's a more healthy wheel to be on. But there's another wheel that's running, you might say, almost transcendent to both of those wheels, and it's called the wheel of Dharma. That's really the wheel that we're most concerned about right now in the human context, is that we would like people to begin to take their mind and place them on the teachings. This is one way off of the problem of philosophical debate and the confluence of opinions that are going on about whether God exists or God doesn't exist. It's really all kind of pointless, because God is existence, or existence is God. You just put whatever word in place of God you want: Brahman, Allah, Almighty Father, divine reality, truth, non-duality. Doesn't really matter. It's not, the word doesn't have to be loaded for you, however you perceive it. But however you perceive it is going to be colored again, or superimposed upon, or sublated, or conditioned by the state of your mind. So if the state of your mind is in a high level of teaching, that's called the Dharma, the revealed scriptures, for instance, and the teachings of the great souls of the world, then you're on a dharmic wheel, and it's as if ignorance and suffering and even the problem between immorality and morality doesn't exist anymore for you. So you can just live in that. It's an atmosphere you create for yourself. Again, with the prana, with the life force that you're using, in the context of some of these questions that are coming, if I can ever get to them. So, but I'm not finished describing wheels yet, because the dharmic wheel is not the highest wheel. It's just a wheel that helps you lift off of the wheels of suffering, birth and death. There's another wheel that's called sadhana, or spiritual practice, that is a very divine-making wheel. That is, it cuts you in the image of your true nature. You begin to practice what you preach, take what you've learned in books and in temples and with teachers, and you begin to practice it actually inside of your own life context, especially in the mind, again, because if the mind is illumined, then life flows beautifully and harmoniously, but if the mind is in doubt or indecision or indeterminacy, or it's afflicted, then of course it will color everything outside of it with those shades. So it's very important. The mind is everything, as Holy Mother said, Sri Sharda Devi. So you have to take that mind with you to Brahman, she said, to the non-dual state. The dual mind will have to be made non-dual. And so in that way, you see how the mind gets off of one wheel and gets on another. So I would say that as long as ignorance dies for you, that's a kind of enlightenment that you arrive at that you probably won't want to go back on. It's a bottom line, or a default zone that you will hold, and you won't fall back into ignorance anymore. At that point, it's not such a matter of getting beyond birth and death. It's a matter of being born in higher states of mind. Higher and higher births, as Sri Aurobindo said in some of his writings. You take higher and higher births, and until finally, if you've satisfied yourself completely, then you can remain in a disembodied state, which is where everyone moves to after they drop this body anyway. So it's not something to be feared or doubted, as I said. It's just existence in another mode outside the body. Outside the body doesn't mean out in space, by the way. It means the kingdoms of heaven within you. So that's my answer to that question about enlightenment. Yes, it does have different stages, and you do break the bonds of birth and death as far as birth and death and ignorance goes, but you can be born again as many times as you want in knowledge, in wisdom, in peace, and in bliss. And it's as if you're not being born at all, until finally you reach that non-dual state, which is full enlightenment. And then, of course, there is no coming and going, moving in and out, or outer and inner don't relate anymore. You're just in one state all the time, like Shiva. Now, the next question here. It has been said that realization is the flight of the alone to the alone. You can see the questions of the students are revolving around realization or moksha or freedom a lot. The flight of the alone to the alone. In response to that, I have heard it said that Vedantists go hand in hand to liberation. But I do not know what is meant by this. I can see a practical aspect of this practiced in India, where Vivekananda pushed his countrymen to care for the suffering masses, feed them, educate them, and give spiritual teachings along the way. But I do not see this aspect in the West. Or is it not what is meant by going hand in hand to liberation? All right, well, so 3 different things here really in this question we're talking about. As far as going hand in hand to liberation and the flight of the alone to the alone, on the level of you come into this world naked and you leave this world naked. You don't come in with clothes, and you don't come in with property and houses and money, and then you can't take it with you too in the end. That's a teaching that's more toward what Vedanta calls the neti stage of practice, whereas you are freeing yourself from attachment to all things in order so you are very sure that you can live without any kind of support other than your own consciousness. It's done very, very well by yogis in caves and monks in monasteries and so forth, but very seldom practiced by householders in their sphere of things with children and everything, but it's very necessary for the householders to do so too. They have to practice that neti as well, so that they can move freely among the objects and among children and among wealth and society and so forth. So there is such a thing as Vedanta societies. In fact, that's the name that was given to many of the centers that Vivekananda founded here in the West. And so when we say we go hand in hand to liberation, it means knowing our true nature to be one and undivided. We're not separate beings, ultimately. It's all one consciousness, indivisible and homogeneous, as we borrow these English words to try and describe the indescribable. So in that way, we're talking about the unanimous conclusion of the Vedanta Dindima, or the Vedanta Siddhanta, that all this is Brahman, all this is one. And we all get together around that and agree upon it. That's what's called going hand in hand to God. It's actually a sort of qualified non-dual statement, really, is that we are always one in God, and then when we come here into this world of apparent separation, we have to make sure that we check in with each other and say, oh yes, you're God, I'm God, that's God, yes, let's all agree upon that. Everything is divine reality here. Let's make sure we know that first and foremost, and then we can move around the world of vagaries and vicissitudes. I was just saying, we can come in contact with some of these anomalies out there and these contradictions, and we can face them off with this inner decision that we've made that all is one and all is Brahman, and that this unanimity, this at the core of our being, our very heart, the heart of the matter, is undeniable and uncontestable. So that is what is really meant by going hand in hand. Now, as far as the flight of the alone to the alone goes, that's of course a very precious phrase, which means that it's more a level of realization than a level of agreement. That is, we're making that statement about the non-dual state of reality from the state of non-dual reality. When we say go hand in hand in Vedanta, we're making the state about oneness from the standpoint of our apparent separations, you see. So there are levels of, again, as we were just saying in the answer to the first question, there are levels of our consciousness that we have to decide upon and define and then move to. We have to be aware that we're moving from state to state and know which state it is we're moving to. The kingdoms of heaven might as well be something right here present all the time. We're not saying, oh, well, post-mortem emancipation, I'll go to heaven after I die and sit near the right-hand side of my Father. Why wait till then, when all the kingdoms of heaven are operating right here and right now? And you could even look outside and say, this is one of the kingdoms of heaven. Look outside of the window of the eyes and see that this is one of the kingdoms of heaven right here. But when you're looking here and you're seeing it outside, it really began inside. Just like you came out of dreaming and you came into waking state, and then you go back into dreaming, and then you go back into deep sleep state. You're moving through 3 states of your consciousness there. So, as I was saying at the beginning of satsang this morning, you move from the physical to the level of energy, and then to the level of mind, then intellect and philosophy and psychology, the psychological level of your being, and hopefully to the spiritual level of your being. You also try and storm that barrier every day in your meditations. Try and put the mind consciously into a state of non-dual reality, because that is the ultimate state. This oneness, cliche kind of oneness people talk about, is actually the truth of the matter. You can look at it even if you observe an atom with all of its particles. There's something that's containing this, that's keeping it all together. Call it God, call it love, or call it energy, whatever you want. But it's more important that the fact be decided upon and agreed upon. And then we can get to the real matter of experiencing it, divine experience. And that will act as an example to others to be able to do the same. So that's kind of the distinction. When you talk about the flight of the alone to the alone, it's not really referring to the fact that you come into the world naked and you leave the world naked. That's a sojourn in the kingdoms of heaven. You're moving from place to place, but consciousness that knows itself does not move from place to place. It's already everywhere. That's the intimation of the word all-pervasive, is that it's already there and in everything, so it doesn't need to move to know itself. It needs to stay still to know it, and if it stays still, it'll know itself more in its entirety, like an ocean without waves. All of a sudden it will realize itself as all water. The waves will give up their wave form and they'll know themselves as water, and that water will then know itself as an ocean. It's the same with human consciousness. It gives up the distinctions it's making and the various scattered tendencies of waves, thought waves that is, and all of a sudden it knows itself as water, as consciousness, and then that consciousness can know itself as the ocean of consciousness called Brahman or Allah or Almighty Father, however you want to put that in the different religious traditions. So the flight of the alone to the alone really is somewhat of a qualified statement too, because it doesn't move, it doesn't fly. It's a poetic statement that points to the very nature of what they call in India Kevala Asti, I am alone. It's one of the great sayings of India. It doesn't mean I'm lone and lonely and poor me and or I'm realized you're not, because Christ said, be thee perfect as thy Father in heaven is perfect. It means that there is one consciousness and everything gets fulfilled in that consciousness. There is no more movement, there is no coming and going, there is no parting with your loved ones anymore at the time of death or any other time. It's a realization that you're talking about there of the oneness of all reality, the uniform nature of consciousness, the true nature of living beings, even when they come here into apparent separation. So these are some philosophical ways, of course, of pointing to it at the philosophical level of our being. So that is going hand in hand means that we will agree upon that when we get here, and that makes the beneficial distinction between these points. The next question here is about prana. How can blockages in the prana be removed once they are detected? I'm going to put that together with another question here from another student that is about the same and answer them both at once. At a recent class while teaching controlling the five senses in yoga, you said, clear granthis by recognizing the block. Granthis are knots. It's a Sanskrit word. Clear the granthis by recognizing the block, meditating on it, and through the willpower, make the connection via mastery of prana, then live in a healed, connected manner. Can you describe some of the ways that we can master the prana and focus on willpower in order to be able to live in this healed and connected manner? Well, of course, methods are fairly abundant in our tradition. It's not just a matter of, say, praying for heaven or something. It's not the only option. We look at the divine being as an exemplar more than a savior in our tradition in India, called Vedanta, we're speaking of right now. Vedanta, yoga, and Buddhism and those kinds of Indian traditions look more towards the great soul that has come, whatever soul that might be, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, in the different religious traditions, as an exemplar. And we want to follow that example and cut ourselves in the image of the Spirit, as is said. So in that way, there are many methods that the Indian seers have put forward to us that we can utilize. Mastering the prana is probably one of the most important, although the problem is that when we come into this world, we don't have the discrimination to know which of those among us have mastered the prana and which haven't. If we knew, and we could, if we were a jeweler and we knew the value of a diamond, then we would be able to look at people who have mastered the prana and then follow their example. That would be almost a tried and true and sure method right there for us. It would just be a matter of monkey see, monkey do, only at a much higher level than a monkey would do it, because you're not a monkey. And, you know, my teacher used to say, oh, I see, the evolutionists, they want to convince me that in order to see my relatives, I have to go to a zoo. You know, so he was laughing about that because he's got his ancestors and he's got his divine lineage. He's got the lineage of Ramakrishna stretching back all the way to Krishna and Rama. See, so that far, far out surpasses anything that time or evolution or science could propose in their little tiny one life scenario. So we're talking about a divine lineage that stretches back inside, again, into the kingdoms of heaven, which are really the kingdom of consciousness, which really is the kingdom of consciousness in its gradated levels. And my consciousness moves between those things until finally it comes to rest. It can move, it can come to rest. That's precisely what Ramakrishna said when he says, you see a snake and it's stationary, and all of a sudden it writhes across the ground. So it has the power of stationary, and it has the power of movement too, you see. So that's the way divine consciousness is. It can be stable, or all of a sudden it can move. And so why not take advantage of both of those modes, you see, to express divinity. You don't want to, as we were back to the first question, you don't want to get bound in cycles of birth and death and express suffering and sorrow and evil and jealousy and those kinds of things. That's not what life is for. Obviously everyone knows that. So then why do people fall into those kinds of problems? So use this dynamic motion of consciousness called Shakti in our tradition to express dharmic things, to express divine life, to live a divine life, and to get off of lower wheels and onto higher wheels. So the prana, as I was saying, if you see it operating, fully operative in some other being, then you'll know it's possible. You know, that person is balanced, they're healthy, they have a body, a yogic body that is functional and is not falling victim to diseases at any level, physical, mental, intellectual. Then you know the prana is flowing unimpeded in a being like that. There are no blocks or grantis. So by example alone, you can do that, and actually that does feed your willpower. That's the other aspect of the question here. The first student asks, how can they be removed once they're detected? Of course, detecting it first is what I'm talking about first here, is knowing that there is a blockage somewhere. It's obvious that you have a blockage in the nerves or in the healing process, so the natural healing process, when you have some malady attend your body and you have to go to the doctor. But it's not so obvious where the blockages are in your mind that is causing the restriction of the movement of your thought power through the subtle nerves in your mind. The nadis, they call them in yoga, the subtle nerves. It's not so obvious where those blockages are, so you have to detect them first, it's true, but that's what we're saying. The methods to do that with in India are quite a few. When you're talking about willpower, I would say that's a noble position that you take. It's not like you go looking for every little problem inside of yourself and face it off one by one. That would take forever. The mind is full of as many imperfections as potential perfections. that's again back to good and bad and morality and immorality and so forth. What you want to do is assume the position. See, so basically that's a manasana, a mental asana. And this is a matter of how I'm trying to describe it here, nobility. That is, the noble human soul should know itself out the gate. That is nature's gate. That is when you're first, before you even come into the fetus, consciousness should know itself, or maybe better put, does know itself. It's the fetus and the birth process and the growing up and the taking on of form and name that really, at first, retards and impedes the process. But then as the brain develops and consciousness, probably first intelligence, visits it, then it begins to express itself in marvelous ways and very beneficial to society. These are the things we like to see. This is amelioration, growth, this is accretion, this is adding on to everything that's within us at the external level. We're bringing out, we're manifesting divinity. One of Swami Vivekananda's greatest hopes for us is one of his most favorite positions was to bring out this divinity inside it and manifest it in life. That was coming full circle as far as he was concerned. So what I'm pointing at here then at the level of willpower is that it's a noble position you assume. People think it's willpower, it's like they have to go run a race or something or exert a lot of energy, but actually nobility of mind, willpower, is something that you affirm first. You see how do you detect the blockages in the prana? It's the same here. How do I detect the lack of willpower in myself? By willpower. So you become aware that you do have willpower, intelligence, consciousness. It's your birthright. It's your nature. And that mere affirmation makes it so, and it begins to flow inside of you. And then day by day, you notice how the blocks are knocked down, the impediments are destroyed, and all of a sudden your consciousness is moving and infilling everything, because it does infill everything. So it's sort of like putting your consciousness there where it already was, but you didn't know it was always there, so you couldn't connect with it. So this is making connections through the willpower using the prana. It's a very subtle thing. People think about, well, if I just sit and breathe and do some breath of fire or something, all of a sudden the prana will awaken. But it's the mind's inability to realize that the prana is flowing all the time, and that the blockages are superimposed by lack of willpower. That is laziness and other problems that we talk about in yoga and even in moral life, life of religious life. So this is a mental asana, as I said. This is a position you put your mind in that once you make a habit of it, just like any other habit, then it's a healthy habit, and you may move about your day-to-day life in that wide open stance with all the prana or energy that you want at your beck and call. And you can put it on any given thing. Now, other methods we talk about, you can put it on the scriptures, and that will hone it to a greater degree. All of a sudden, you'll realize that the testament of the saints and seers in the scriptures is in accordance with what your own experience has told you. See, so all of a sudden you're making a connection there. And this is how you become one with the Father. Ultimately, you'll make the ultimate connection that I and my Father are one. But in the meantime, you're making these intermediate or penultimate connections with other living beings. You can see how might as well just be going back to the first question again, and getting off of one wheel onto another wheel. It's a process. Enlightenment is a process. Sri Ram says that in the Adhyatma Ramayana. Mankind comes to enlightenment in stages. It doesn't happen all at once like some big boom. Or if it does, that big boom happens after these stages have been completed. See, so this is how to master the prana. It's not something that you can do just by eating healthy food and exercising. That's good for the physical level of your being, but you still have, with a healthy body, you're still living in darkness, you see. The mind hasn't opened up. The prana is not flowing on the intellectual level. You're still making excuses for yourself. Oh, words aren't necessary. Scriptures, I don't need them anymore. They're too old. You see, they don't have any truth in them anymore. And so you're making excuses for yourself, when if your prana was actually open and moving inside of yourself, you'd be having all of this realization coming from every sentence that you read in the scriptures. It would be an open book to you, pun intended. So you have this marvelous method of scriptural study, swadhyaya, and memorization of scriptures open to you. That's a kind of freeing of a prana. If you have a blockage in the prana and the scriptures don't make sense to you, and you're making excuses for yourself, saying, oh, that's just all plodding and it's not necessary, I can just use my heart, and you don't even know what heart is yet, because heart is Atman, then get the prana moving with the scriptures, attend upon a class, begin to think. And this is noble. This is what I'm saying. It's a kind of a noble mental asana that you assume, just like this. If you can sit like this, you master your posture, then you can breathe, and if you can breathe, then you can think. This is, the 8 limbs of yoga put into 3 steps, really. And what's hidden in those 3 steps is the prana. It's this energy that you say, I don't have control of, or there's blockages in. Well, let's just say the prana is a wide open field, a pool that I have not dove into yet. It's always flowing, so let's remove these blockages by the nobility of my own willpower. See, this is what I'm saying as an answer to these 2 questions. Because those 2 methods are there, prana and its flow, and willpower. There are other methods to do that. I mean, a very, very noble soul already has the art of meditation down and would come into this life and could meditate right away. Maybe they go from monastery to monastery in their lifetime, or from one lifetime of realization to the next time of realization, like a bodhisattva. So they already have the idea of the ever-free prana in their mind. They already have willpower mastered, and they already have very high level of meditation going on. So they're not experiencing any blockages at any level of their being. They're just trying to use this wide open energy of prana to try and help humanity on the level which will be most beneficial to it. So this is my answer to these 2 questions put together. Then you can live in a healed and connected manner. That has to do with willpower and prana. And a more unconventional or non-conventional definition of the word willpower. Because, like I say, sometimes we think of willpower as some sort of physical effort we have to put forward, like moving a boulder. See? But actually, it's a noble thing if you understand it rightly. And you look back on these impediments that you got through later and say, why were those such a problem? You see, it was really my mind that was creating the problem. So willpower must be something facile, must be something spontaneous. Kriya, in fact, is one of Divine Mother's arms, you see, spontaneous action. So spontaneous action would be fed by spontaneous thought, because thought is father to the deed. So this is this wide open land of consciousness that these great souls have access to all the time. And their willpower isn't a matter of some sort of strenuous effort in, like inside the head or something. It's just this noble position that they adopt. And everything gets accomplished by just simply assuming that noble position. This is non-duality. Now, last question here brings us down back into the world. So it's a good round that we've had here of questions. As we've taken the flight of the alone to the alone philosophically, now we can come back down to financial problems. This question says, when opportunities for financial improvement arise naturally and effortlessly while practicing contentment, how can the aspirant be truly sure they aren't grasping after problems like lust and gold in pursuing such opportunities? How can I be sure, in other words, the increased abundance of money is pursued to better raise family and support the teacher? And that's not such a matter, again, as the tact I often take is not how can I be sure, it's that I should be sure, I must be sure that this money is used to help other beings, to raise a dharmic family and to help spiritual organizations who are spreading truth like this, so that this wonderful dharma can be spread to the world as a solution for all the ills that are accosting it. Now, opportunities for financial improvement arise naturally and effortlessly. Well, if they do, then that is already a sign that they are of a dharmic nature. That is, they are sort of a gift or a boon coming from your natural everyday life. We say in our tradition, Divine Mother provides the four fruits of life. If we observe the Dharma, that is, if we observe righteous living, and then she gives us kama, satisfaction of our desires in the Dharma, and artha, wealth that comes legitimately to us through legitimate means, and then finally ending in moksha, liberation. So it's a really quick study of these four fruits of life. They're called purusharthas. First Dharma, then that is righteous living, spiritual living, divine life, and then wealth, desire will be satisfied, and it'll end in moksha. That's, the two tail ends of those are the most important things, the head and the tail. In this case, first starting with religious life and ending in freedom. The desires and the wealth in between are just, natural and spontaneous, as you say here, if those two are kept in mind. So, in fact, you probably don't want to forget yourself in Dharma. Say, oh, I'm living a Dharmic life now, everything is fine, I know the teachings, but there's no end to it. Because Krishna says in the Gita, you must know the end of knowledge and truth. So Dharma has to lead you somewhere, and that is moksha, liberation. Liberation in this life, jivan mukti. So that would be how I would comment on that. As far as lust and gold go, well, those are, of course, easily recognizable. Most people, if they have any kind of awareness or consciousness, wherewithal in their minds at all, they can recognize lustful tendencies, they can recognize greed in themselves and in others. So it's not that difficult a move to depart from the six passions. So basically those are lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, fear. And you've got pride and avarice and shame and grief. I call this six passions and the eight fetters. They're listed down in the scriptures so that we can easily make the distinction between those and dharmic qualities like selflessness and compassion and the practices that go with those things, like meditation and study of scripture. All of these things are an easy decision to make, an easy distinction to make between worldliness and spiritual life, dharma and adharma, if you want to put it that way. So you could probably quit asking questions like that pretty easily. I mean, if you know the truth will set you free if you know the truth. So simply do the process of discrimination between the real and the unreal, or the beneficial and the non-beneficial in this regard, and then simply move away from the non-beneficial and take to yourself what is the Lord's. Grant unto Caesar what is Caesar's, take unto yourself what is the Lord's, kind of idea. And that will mean that Dharmic life can go on without a hitch, without any of these hitches. The 6 passions, the 8 fetters, the 5 impediments, the 4 deadly traps, and a whole host of other problems that we're all too well aware of. But that's the point. Since we are so well aware of them, we should get them behind us and take to ourselves what is dharmic, what is divine, what is beneficial. May we live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Or in other words, Om Bhadram Karnebihi Srinayama Devaha Bhadram Pasyema Akshabir Jatraha Sthirayaranga Ishtushtuvam Sastanuvir Vishema Devahitam Yadayuhu. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother of the Universe, with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.